All right, welcome to Tiger Bay. This is our last Tiger Bay of 2020. And I just want to keep saying this is the last of anything 2020 because this week, you can't ask for much more of an exciting week. So we had an election, but we didn't have a result in an election. Then we might have had a result in the election. Then Georgia gets curb stomped by Florida, which was actually a good thing. And then we have a hurricane come by named Ada, like Ada State, ate the state of Florida, whatever it is. And I was like, all in 8 days. So we have our meeting here is opportune. We're going to miss everybody. So in advance, happy holidays, but we've got a great panel for you and let's get to it. We're going to do something a little different with these guys today because they're all experts in their field. And rather than me ask questions of each of them individual, I'm going to kind of toss questions out and let them ping it around amongst themselves. If they start to talk over each other, I'll interrupt them. But for the most part, I think they can handle it. So let's start with Jack Brill. Jack has been in the food and hospitality industry for over 30 years. He's the acting chairman of the Republican Party of Sarasota. He's had that role for the last 2 years, although honestly, I thought it was much longer than that. He's also been vice chairman for the past 5 years. Jack is on the advisory council. Whoops, did we lose Zach? Rats. Of Gannon University. He's a member of the Kiwanis Club of Longboat Key and a member of the Men's Guild for is it St. Mary's or St. Mary's Church?
St. Mary's Star of the Sea Church, our church in Longboat.
Out on Longboat Key. So please welcome Jack Brill.
Thank you.
That's the sound of applause you hear. Joanne DeVries. Say hi.
Hi,
Joanne is working hard today. You'll see people walking in and out behind her, and she'll like throw her mask on real quick. So it's going to be fun to watch her. She has been the chair of the Sarasota County Democratic Party for the past 4 years, although again, it seems like it's been longer than that. She's passionate about politics, obviously, as they all are. Moved to Sarasota about 20 years ago, worn a bunch of hats for the state and local party. She's been a Democratic committee woman. She's been a Sarasota County vice chair, campaign committee, treasurer of the Florida Democratic Party, the FDP Democratic Counties Chair Association, past vice president of the Democratic Club of Sarasota, and an Obama delegate to the Democratic National Convention in 2012. She's currently also a precinct committee woman for Sarasota County Precinct 209. And when she's not doing that, she's the past president of the Hearing Loss Association of Sarasota, Manatee County, and is a strong advocate for those with hearing loss in Sarasota. Please welcome Joanne DeVries. Sorry. Jacob Ogles, the professor, is here. He has been covering Southwest Florida politics. He's actually been covering Florida politics since 2000. So we can all blame you for that election. You got here and everything went haywire. It's your fault. Right. But he's been covering Southwest Florida since 2008. He now serves as a columnist for and contributing senior editor for SRQ Media and is the Southwest Florida reporter for Florida Politics. His political coverage has appeared nationally in The Advocate and Wired magazine. So please welcome Jacob Ogles. Yay. And do we have Zach Anderson back? Let's see. Zach is back. You're there. So we only have half Zach today. We've got the voice. This is like a radio interview or something. We were having camera problems. So say hi, Zach.
Hello.
He's been the political editor for the Sarasota Herald Tribune since 2015 and has also helped coordinate statewide political coverage for Gannett's Florida newspapers. He graduated from the University of Illinois in 2002, although he doesn't look that old, with a degree in journalism and worked at newspapers in Michigan and the Florida Panhandle before starting at the Herald Tribune in 2006, covering county government. So please welcome Zach Anderson. Yay, Zach. All right, guys. We have lots to talk about today. So I want to break it up a little bit into some digestible components. We've obviously got the national issues, and we're going to start with the national issues. But we also have some interesting state issues and some really interesting, I think, local issues, the way this last election came out. So I'm going to start with kind of a big picture question, which is really just what surprised you? And again, let's talk nationally first. Is what surprised you about this election and what didn't surprise you about this election? I mean, we all talk about like we're all geniuses, but some things are to be expected, some things aren't. So Jack, I'll start with you and then we'll go Jacob, Joanne, and Zach.
on a national level, I'm amazed at how strong of a year the Republican Party had nationally. In addition to the 2 congressional seats in Florida, there were 5 state governments that went from Democrat to Republican across the country. There were over 20 women that are going into Congress from the Republican Party, and including 2 Korean American women from California. So when you look, we're going to keep the Senate. We're already at 50-48. We got Georgia we'll get into in a little bit, but overall, except for the presidential side of it, the Republican Party had an incredible year nationwide. That was probably the biggest surprise out of the whole thing.
Hello, we lost him, Morgan.
That's all right.
Yeah,
So Jacob, what surprised you and what didn't? It's funny because someone was saying I was, you could hear me writing, so I muted myself and then immediately forgot I'd done that. So Jacob, what surprised you? What didn't surprise you about the recent events?
Well, of course, the biggest surprise, I think, to all of us this year was the coronavirus and the length of the impact of the coronavirus, the way that just completely upended everything about what all of us do. That absolutely includes politics. I guess the other big surprise to me is, polling is still broken. Every effort that has gone into trying to solve whatever problems led to extremely poor projections in the 2016 election. We'd been told that had been fixed. We'd been told we're waiting for education now. We're treating populations different. We're catching the shy voters on both sides. Not really the case by everything that we can see at this point. So I think that industry is still going to have a lot to contend with, and media, which inevitably turns to polling as a way to help us guide what we're doing in a very real sense. We suffer whatever consequences exist with polling. So that was the biggest kind of enduring surprise for my industry. In terms of what I didn't get surprised by, I don't know. I mean, I think that the results at the state level were not unpredictable, even if the races maybe didn't all go exactly the way we all thought they were. I think we had a fairly clean election in the state of Florida. Maybe that should surprise everybody, but honestly, it's what I hope for every time. And here we are.
Joanne.
Thank you. I have to agree with Jake. The pandemic really hit Democrats for a loop, not only locally, statewide, but nationally. It really put it was a brick wall. We quit voter registration basically in March and never recovered. We didn't do the door-to-door. We listened to the CDC and stayed home, and that really affected our turnout and a lot of the numbers. What was expected? We knew, some Democrats worked on vote by mail. We did a great job with that. We got our vote by mail ballots back. We knew the Republicans would get out their base, they energize their base, they get them out. I'd love to know Jack's secret, if you'd like to share that. It also statewide that happened. So that was expected. In Sarasota, when we have a 39,000 voter registration gap, we know that we're not going to see some wins. We try to lower the margins, and I think we did that.
Zach, you still there? Uh-oh.
He's on mute.
Zach, are you on mute? We'd love to hear from you.
Sorry, and I apologize to everybody for my camera not working, but not sure what's going on. But I thought it was not very surprising that Donald Trump carried Florida, even though a lot of the polls indicated that Biden, was leading in the state. As Jacob said, the polling industry has some issues, and I think we all should be a little bit skeptical of some of these polls going forward, or adjust our expectations to what polls can really provide, because in Florida, the polling was not particularly accurate, but I don't think it was a surprise nonetheless that Trump carried the state. Even though the polls weren't great, they did show him being much more competitive here than he was in other swing states. It was surprising, however, how much he was able to win Florida by. A 3.4 percentage point win in Florida is just an absolute blowout for a presidential race. Trump won by 1.2 percentage points in 2016, and Obama won by less than a percentage point in 2012. So, Trump basically tripled his margin. And I think that was surprising. And it was surprising to see really how strong Republicans were up and down the ballot. Not surprising considering, the top of the ticket. It's hard to overcome that. But even down in Miami, where, you had two Republicans win congressional seats that Democrats had flipped in 2018. That was a really strong showing for the GOP, and it should make Democrats nervous going forward.
Yeah, well, you guys brought it up, and I was going to get to it later, but this polling issue is interesting to me, and I know it's a little bit of inside baseball and probably too soon in this seminar to talk about it, but what is it about the polling that's going wrong? I mean, it used to be everyone blames cell phones. It's like, oh, well, we can't poll. Everyone's got cell phones and we can't do that. And the only people that answer are people who have home phones. I guess they've solved that problem. Maybe not. Then is it the way they're setting up the sampling? Is it that they just, that people are giving them, what was it? The effect, the shy voter, I think you said, Jacob, the shy voter impact is bigger than we all imagine. What is it? And Zach, I'll work my way backwards this time. Zach, what do you think it is?
I think at this point, we'd all just be guessing. I think they have to go back and examine, what went wrong and do a bit of an autopsy here. But it seems like something similar to 2016. And what happened in 2016 is they were not getting enough of these working class white voters, lower propensity voters who ended up coming out strongly for Trump. And it seems like that's probably what happened again this year, where there is a group, and I guess they've been called maybe the shy Trump voter, or maybe just the Trump voter who doesn't really want to answer polls, or so it does seem like there is a group of Trump supporters that were not being reached through polls, that they were not weighting these polls properly to make up for that, even though they tried to adjust the polls from 2016. And it really raises questions about some of the accuracy of these polls going forward.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Anyone else got any theories before we go to the next topic?
I'm pretty much on the record. Go ahead. Go ahead, Joanne.
I was just going to say, in all honesty, Democrats did not look at the polls. After 2016, we decided, don't look at the polls, just keep energized, keep working up until the bitter end. I know I had been reading that the people that were being polled were not giving honest answers. But now you're hearing about the pollsters saying, well, they really weren't that off. So it's kind of interesting. They try to get around their numbers, saying they weren't as bad as they really were. But Democrats did not look at polls this time.
Yeah.
I'm on the record. I was quoted in Politico nationally that polling is dead. So, they were so far off on locally, state, nationally. If you think about, Zach mentioned about, the blue collar workers. Whoever thought the Republican Party would become the working party's party, in the election cycle, and I don't think they were polling those folks. And I think a lot of those folks, we got tons of folks that were afraid if they gave their opinion, they were supporting Trump, that they'd end up in a, war with their neighbors and, et cetera, et cetera. So the pollsters need to find a radical change of their methods, or they're not going to be in business much longer.
Jacob, anything else?
Yeah, I think I think we ought to admit part of the problem is we're asking too much of pollsters. If you look at the margins of error rates on every poll that's come out, you'll see that the polls weren't as far off as we sometimes feel when we're just focused on outcomes. The truth is, a poll that's got, say, a 3% margin of error, and that applies to both candidates that are on the poll, it can be like 6% off or more, depending on how you read it, and still technically be within that margin of error. So I think that part of this is that we want pollsters to give us something that's real precision, and they want to give us something that we can predict the future with, to use polls as a crystal ball rather than using it as a political science tool to, say, dissect who's actually voting for things after an election, the way exit polls are used. I think a lot of it is that we are expecting polls to be something that they're not. It's like asking why this Subaru isn't able to get us to the moon. It never will. Nothing that you ever do to the car will get you to the moon. But we keep wanting that to happen. We keep wanting it to do more than it can. And I think maybe a lot of this is us adjusting our expectations of what polling can do as much as it is trying to ask so much of these pollsters.
So maybe go ahead.
I got to throw in. We had in October, we had one poll showing Trump down in Sarasota County by 16 points. In 2016, he won Sarasota County by 26,000. Our goal was 28,000 this year, and we made it with 28,174. So the margin of error is one thing, but when it's a football field error, size error, I don't know. I just respectfully think that whole industry's got to be changed.
Interesting. So maybe when they tell us there's a 3% margin of error and it's a 1% difference, maybe we should listen to them. All right. So let's work our way backwards. We'll start with you, Jacob, on this one. And I don't want to make anyone mad out there in our viewer land, but let's assume the election is not overturned. Okay. Does Biden have a mandate? And if so, what is it? Given the outcome, the way this thing came out, where, as you guys have described, we've got this strong down ballot Republican showing and not as big a margin as people expected. Is there a mandate, and what is it? Jacob, what do you think?
To paraphrase JFK here, mandate schmandate. He won, Trump lost. That's how it goes. What really is going to matter, as much as we talk about these mandates as if I win by a landslide, then Congress is going to let me do anything that I want. And if I win by a narrow amount, then they're going to be really tight on my agenda. That's not really what history has shown us. What matters is whether you have the votes in the legislature to enact the things that you want to do, which is why I think you're going to see so much political energy put into Georgia right now. But I think that a mandate, I don't know. He won by 5 million votes. Some people like to point at the margin or the percentage of vote that he got was higher, but you hear people parse it every different way. It's really high when you only look at candidates for somebody unseated at a sitting president. All that really matters is whether his agenda can move on the Hill, and what can get to his desk that he sends over to Congress, what comes back. So I don't know. I don't think that the mandate matters as much in numbers as we like to imply sometimes.
I want to know if JFK really said mandate schmandate. Or did you just make that up?
Yes. No. Google it. I swear.
All right, then.
He won by a historically small margin over Nixon. People forget that because now we only look at the Electoral College. But, that's what happens.
That is true. All right, Joanne, what do you think? Joanne?
Oh, I'm sorry. Biden won by 5 million votes. Maybe Republicans don't consider that a mandate, but that's a pretty strong, surplus of votes. It's going to be a problem. Maybe we're all going to be fighting in Georgia to get those 2 Senate seats. It'll be difficult. I just hope that we all come together and we start accomplishing some things. We definitely have to have a better response with the pandemic. We've got to come together and work with each other because our country needs to be moving forward right now.
Jack.
I guess I'm going to, in tying in, the good news is record turnout on voters. More voters in this country voted this year, which was incredible. We had a record turnout by 35,000. My numbers may be off in Sarasota County, highest election in the history of Sarasota County. That's good for democracy. That's good for everybody. If mandate, I'm not sure. You got to think about, the one thing I'll respectfully disagree with Joanne on is that if you look at the numbers in Georgia, Kelly Loeffler had 1.2 million votes. Doug Collins had 900,000 votes. Those will be lumped together to be 2.1 million. And Raphael Warnock had 1.4. The closer race up there will be Perdue and Ossoff. And Ossoff's been running for office in Georgia, I think, since I was about 12 years old. I'm kidding, but it seems like it every time I'm up there, he's running commercials for some office up there. So, I think there'll be, obviously they're going to try and, go back to the Paris Accords, World Health Organization, things like that. I'm sure we'll try a federal mask mandate. I'm not sure it's going to go very well in Florida, but, so those are the issues, that is a $5 million or 5 million vote win, but the actual turnout was incredible. And I'm actually proud of everybody, that all the people that voted in this country, because that's what we needed, is to have, we have the results, and once everything's certified, we'll have the final results. But that fact that so many people voted, and we'll have a lot less people to come up and say, I don't like what happened. And you say, did you vote? And they go, no. I said, well, look in the mirror. You complain to yourself for not voting. This year really changed that, which was really, really good.
Zach.
Howdy.
You're back. Hello.
I had to switch my device here to the iPad to get the video to work. I think, Biden certainly has as much of a mandate as Trump did. It looks like he's on track to win 306 electoral college votes, which would be the same as Trump. And he would actually win the popular vote, as Joanne said, by more than 5 million, whereas Trump lost the popular vote. So you could make the argument that Biden would have a mandate to pursue just as aggressive policies as Trump did. I think that is a little bit of, I think gets into some dicey territory, though. And unfortunately, I think both parties, they take a win and they view that as being able to do whatever they want. And the reality is that we are still a very divided country. If you look at the swing states, they're all within, or, around a percent. Some are less than a percentage point victory. Some are, 1 or 2 points. So, obviously people in these swing states were very divided. And I think Biden would be wise to try and reach across the aisle. I think this country has seen too much of the parties pushing their own agendas without listening to the other side. It's very hard to come to an agreement with the other side because there's not a lot of political incentive to do that. The bases of both parties fight compromise very hard. Compromise is seen as, even though people say they want it, I think the bases of the parties often view it as a dirty word. And I think that, for the good of the country, it would be better if Biden looked at it less as having a mandate and more as, the mandate would really be to try and bring the country together as much as possible.
Yeah, you raise a good point. I've only got a couple of national questions left, but that's a good point, Zach. Is everyone talks about the blue wall? It's really more like a blue curtain. I mean, it's not a wall. I mean, when you're winning states by that close a margin, wall is not the right word. Okay. And I do actually, Jack brought up an interesting point. And it's true. We had great historic voter turnout as a percentage of registered voters. What we may have to get you guys together on another panel is, what I don't understand, and I'd love for you guys to tell me someday, is why do we still have 25% of this country that's voting eligible that doesn't register to vote? And even if we get to 72% nationally of people who voted, what's up with the other 28%? who are these people? They went to the trouble to register to vote, and almost over a quarter of the people who bothered to register to vote still didn't vote in this election. You guys ponder that, and in 2021, we're going to have another seminar about why that may be. But moving on, we got some questions from the audience. Future mail-in ballots is top of the list, obviously. So we'll kind of work our way backwards. Zach, I waited till you had a drink and then called on you. I'm going to give a plug. I'm going to give a plug for the state of Florida and for Ron Turner. Is we do an unbelievably good job with these mail-in ballots. I don't know what the rest of the country is doing, but it seems like we've got it down. But what is the future, given the way it went down in this last election? What do you see happening with it, Zach?
There definitely seems to be a backlash. You know, the president is continuing to fight these mail-in ballots and say that they were fraudulent. So I wouldn't be surprised if Republican controlled states, even though Florida is a Republican controlled state, you know, the mail-in ballots people are so used to them, and it has become so commonplace here. I doubt that it'll change much. And as you saw in Florida, even though the Democrats were really aggressive about using mail-in voting and getting their voters to sign up for vote by mail, it didn't change the outcome for the election for them. So it doesn't give one party an advantage over another at all. Republicans successfully used vote by mail for decades in this state and locally to get their voters out. And so really the only reason that Democrats did better than Republicans in vote by mail this election cycle is because the president was so down on vote by mail and so against it. And he discouraged his voters from doing it. And so I think there's going to be a fallout from that that'll continue for some time. And I don't know that states are going to be pushing mail-in voting going forward. But I do think that it is proven in Florida to be a very effective and normal way to vote, and eventually I'm sure that it will continue to expand across the country.
Joanne, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you. I don't know if Ron Turner is on this call. Our supervisor of elections is phenomenal. He kept Jack and I posted on a daily basis, starting with vote by mail. His whole team is just incredible. So we are so fortunate. I kept telling him he needs to reach out to the entire country and show them what they do in Sarasota. That being said, you know, obviously Democrats, we did a big push for the vote by mail. We got 96% of our vote by mail ballots back by either people mailing them, dropping them off, or actually voting at the polls. I noticed that the Republicans and Jack, all of a sudden Sarasota Republicans started building up their vote by mail numbers. And they also got a lot of their vote by mail back. So kudos to you. We knew they would go to the polls because they do that. So we did put a lot of pressure on our people. So there were 20,000 Democrats that didn't vote, which is, we had an 81% turnout. Jack, you had 84%. You always do a little bit better, but we were really proud of that. We were 6th in the state of Florida, percentage-wise, for voter turnout in Sarasota County for Democrats. So, you know what? We're going to try to find out where those 20,000 voters are. If they've moved, maybe they're on the election records and they should be removed. You know, a lot of people move out or pass away in Florida. So who knows if the records are absolutely correct. But again, Ron Turner, he's just phenomenal, and his team.
Yeah, they really are terrific. Jacob, what do you think?
I'll tell you, I don't know if any of the trends are permanent. As Zach mentioned, mail became a negative thing in the eyes of many Republican voters this year as a result of the president thrashing the process as fraudulent, kind of inherently. Will that endure? I mean, this is something that was dreamed up in the last year. And Donald Trump is presumably exiting the building here. I mean, we're going to have to see to what degree he remains a thought leader in the Republican Party. I don't know. Somebody else will at some point need to step into a leadership role within the party, and what they say is going to matter. I mean, I see that Lindsey Graham is already talking about prohibiting mail-in ballots nationwide. I don't know exactly what the system is or how long it's been in place in South Carolina, but I don't think that there's any reason to think that how people feel about it this year is necessarily going to be a permanent trend. What I've seen over 20 years is more and more people have gravitated towards the mail. The pandemic accelerated that trend. I think it's more likely that we're going to just see a continuation, that more and more people realize that mail is so convenient. And by mail, I mean a ballot that comes to your house in the mail, however you get it back to the supervisor of elections. But I think that that's ultimately going to win the day. And when Donald Trump becomes a diminishing voice in this intentional thrashing of the mail stops happening, you're going to see Republicans go back to the mail too.
Interesting. Jack?
Well, I'm going to, on the whole subject, I will give Joanne and her team credit on the vote by mail. You know, we were registering people all along. And then I was watching the numbers on the Democratic side just tower upward. And I was like, well, something's got, going on here. So we spent a tremendous time, resources before the primary and then in general election getting out. We had a 91% vote by mail return. And that ended up it really climbed in the last 2 weeks. I think a lot of but it was a lot lesser number than the Democrats did overall. This is probably the first time we've lost the vote by mail in Sarasota County. But the interesting thing also you got to look at, I'm not 100% sure the exact number, but over 72,000 people walked their ballot or drove their ballot to one of the early voting or the SOE offices. I was absolutely amazed at the numbers every day. 3,000 today, 2,000 today, 4,000. I mean, so you've got your ballot and you're driving it. The biggest loser of this whole thing was the Postal Service, frankly, because they didn't get the revenue. But, I put in we put our ballots in by mail, put in the post office at Longboat, and the 2 for my parents showed up in Manatee 2 days later, and the 2 for us in Sarasota County showed up 3 days later. The system worked great. So we did play catch up on that one. I think, the option of dropping ballots off going forward, I think that may stick for a while. I think everyone found that very convenient where they can just drop their, ballot off. I think that will hang around for an election cycle. But at the same time, to Joanne mentioned about the numbers, we had an 84.4% turnout. We had 122,000 Republicans show up. The interesting thing, and I'm looking at the number, 62,000 NPAs showed up. The NPAs had a 70% turnout too. As Joanne mentioned, 81% for the Democratic Party. The interesting thing is that in Sarasota County, it was about an 80.4% overall turnout. Largest, I mentioned earlier, largest election in the history of Sarasota County. Not sure we'll match that anytime soon. But obviously we want to go back to, we've always been very competitive in vote by mail. So obviously as part of our 2022 strategy is to continue looking at that. And, and obviously like this year where everything changed by the hour with the pandemic, when the vaccine is done, and then we get back to normal or whatever the new normal may be, that we'll see how that goes. But I still think the drop off of the vote by mail is going to be a big part of the elections.
Maury, can I add one thing?
Of course.
Yeah, I would just note, Jacob said earlier about how, the election went very well in Florida. It went smoothly, and we didn't, have any kind of, we weren't the national laughing stock that we've been in past elections. And a big reason for that was because so many people voted early, whether through in-person early voting or vote by mail. There was 66% turnout before election day, and about 3/4 of the vote was cast before election day. And in Florida, because Ron Turner and Mike Bennett and other election supervisors could start counting those ballots 3 weeks early. The ballots were already counted by the time the polls closed. And you could have called Florida at like 9 o'clock, 9:30. I mean, the evidence was clear at that point. So it was smooth because they prepared and because the votes were in. So vote by mail helped make Florida, much smoother than a lot of the other states this cycle.
Yeah,
actually, to your point, Zach, on election night at our victory party, Joe did call Florida about 9:10. And we're looking at the screens on Fox, like, hey guys, get with the action here. We won. Hello. And it took them a while to catch up to us.
Joe who?
Yeah.
Our state chairman, Joe Gruters, our favorite
Never
senator.
heard of the guy. Never heard of the guy. Are you saying he's Gruters? What? All right. So actually, that's a good jumping off point in terms of the you guys keep bringing up the voter totals. Okay, I wasn't on the ground like you guys were. I mean, to some extent, either as observers and commentators or as actual participants. I'm pointing to Jack and Joanne on this one. It seems to me that the ground game in this election was interesting because for a while there were no Democrats, as far as I could tell, knocking on doors, and then the Republicans. And Joe, I gotta give Joe credit. He was on, every weekend. He and Christian Ziegler are somewhere in the state knocking on doors and posting on social media and this kind of thing. And I was waiting for them all to get COVID, but they didn't. And they went and knocked on doors all the time. Now, conversely, I hear in places like Nevada, the Democrats were knocking on doors. So I guess I'll start with you, Joanne. I don't mean to be critical of the democratic process, but I guess I am being. Is what was the thought process there? And do you think that really made a difference to drive what is really, I think we can all admit, historic and unexpected Republican turnout?
Well, absolutely. COVID hit us for a loop. Democrats all over the country, state of Florida, Sarasota, took it seriously. We did not want to jeopardize any of our volunteers. We did not go on the ground up until the last few weeks. We had to totally rethink our get out the vote plan, and we did it remotely. And for any of the volunteers that are on this call, thank you, thank you, thank you. They all stepped up. We figured out a plan, and we did what we could. The presidential coordinated campaign, they had hundreds of people in the state of Florida, but they were all remote. Normally, they are the ones that are on the ground. So in the last few weeks, when we thought it was a little bit safer, we did get people on the ground. It definitely affected it. It affected the vote and the turnout. And in hindsight, I'm not going to apologize for saving lives. We were in a huge pandemic at the time, and what we did was the right thing to do.
So you think it made a difference?
Absolutely.
Interesting. Okay.
So I'm gonna jump in. Obviously, we had a different strategy. I can tell you that every one of in Sarasota County, we knocked on 57,000 doors. We made 1.5 million phone calls. We did it with a very strict set of procedures for social distancing, masks, the whole bit. It was amazing how many people, especially the seniors, if you're standing 10 feet away, they were happy to talk to somebody at the door because they hadn't seen anybody in 6 months. So, that obviously proved to get, and I look at all the comments we got, super spreader this, super spreader that, this, that, we only had one case of a person coming down with it. And that was down in Northport. We tested everybody and their brother down there. We shut down our Northport office, had it scrubbed, and we were back up following Monday morning, and everybody's fine. So as long as you do it properly and safely, the ground game really, really worked.
Jacob, what were your observations of the ground games? And Zach, I'll come to you next.
In Florida, I think there's an argument that this is absolutely what made the difference. And I got to tell you, I think that in some ways, this speaks to the politicization that came with pandemic response, to the point where people were being a little extreme about it. And I'm certainly I know that Jack was doing all those procedures and everything, and I know that all the candidates that I spoke to who are doing door-to-door campaigning themselves, they were knocking on a door, jumping back 10 feet and waiting to talk to somebody from a distance. Many of them had masks and would leave them on if the person there was wearing a mask, or take it off if they thought it would be more comfortable. I don't know about the health wisdom of taking it off, but at the same time, we didn't see a lot of spread that's directly tied to canvassing. I think that the politicization, we talk a whole lot about it on the anti-masker side, of those people who are just refusing ever to wear masks, and they tend to be Trump type voters. Several months ago, I wrote a column about, the anti-everything people and then the scolds, and we can't let either of them totally take over the conversation about public policy. And I think in some ways, and I don't mean this terribly as a criticism, but in liberal politics this year, the scolds kind of had an elevated voice, and it made a reluctance among a lot of Democrats and maybe a lot of Democratic voters. Maybe they wouldn't have been welcome at the doorsteps of Democratic super voters in the first place. But I think that caused people to think, well, I'm just not going to go out at all. I'm going to do everything by teleconference. And that just left the ground game to be owned completely by one side of the political aisle. As a result, we have a Donald Trump victory that dwarfs Barack Obama's 2008 victory from 2008, when he won by almost 3 points. And we all thought, whoa, that's a Florida landslide. Well, if that's a Florida landslide, Trump is just an
avalanche.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I think, is that ultimately the fear factor or the scold factor and the shame factor maybe discouraged people from doing what they needed to do to win an election.
Interesting. So, Zach, we have a new word now, the scolds. What do you think?
Well, it was difficult. It would have been difficult for Biden to do things differently, considering that, one of the big premises of his campaign is that he was going to manage the coronavirus better, and that, Donald Trump had mismanaged it. So, I mean, it was in keeping with the theme. And I think they were the Democrats and the Biden campaign especially were hesitant to go out there and be accused of potentially doing things that were unsafe, when they were so aggressively criticizing Trump as being unsafe and having these super spreader rallies and not taking proper precautions. So they sort of painted themselves into a corner on that. And I think we can all agree, it sounds like, that there was no question that it hurt Democrats. One way that it hurt them was voter registration. The Republicans were able to narrow the gap in voter registration. That's a big deal. You look at how Barack Obama won Florida in 2008 and 2012. He went out there and registered a lot of new voters, young voters, low propensity voters. And when you expand the universe of voters, you're more likely to get them to come out and vote. And so, if voter registration is a big deal, Republicans did it, Democrats not as much, and it definitely hurt them. Hindsight is 2020, but when you look at canvassing, when you look at door knocking, I talked to candidates who were doing door knocking and thought that they could do it very safely. You go, you knock on a door, you wear a mask, you take 10 whatever steps back, and you don't get in people's faces, but you still engage them in a personal way. So I'm not so sure that if Democrats looking back on that, some of them might have wished that they had done things differently, because it does seem like there were safer ways to do some of this stuff that would really have limited the possibility of spreading the virus and made their campaigns more effective. You look at somebody like Margaret Good, who won the District 72 State House race in 2018 in a special election that was nationally watched, this big election where she flipped a district that Donald Trump had carried by 4 points, and she won it by 7 points. How did she do that? Well, her ground game was a huge part of that. She had literally not just dozens, but hundreds of volunteers out there. I went to one of the canvassing kickoffs at Barbara Ford Coates' house, and there was a few dozen people there, Democratic state House members from around the state who came to help her canvas. There's no question that that aggressive ground game helped her, and not having one probably hurt her in the congressional race against Vern Buchanan, although I'm not sure that would have made the difference, but definitely something that hurt Democrats this election cycle.
And speaking of that race, you got to look at, this year Vern won by over 53,000 votes. He actually did 3 points better this year in Sarasota County than he did in 2018. And if you look at the numbers and everything, actually David Shapiro was a much tougher candidate than Margaret was for Congress. So, 53,000, it's a lot of votes. I mean, you talk with the ground games. Greg Stubbe won by 125,000 votes. Joe Gruters won by 56,000 votes. Tommy Gregory, 40,000 votes. I mean, it goes on and on. Frankly, it's interesting to tie into that is when I even look down, where we had charter review candidates, one won by 62,000. Our hospital board candidates won between the 30s and 50s. Are on and on. When you look at the actual numbers, it's interesting. It looks to me, it looks to all of us, that the NPA vote, about 60 to 70% of it, broke our favor this time, which is, as Joanne will attest, that's always a roll of the dice for the folks. We have our theories of where to target, but that's one. So I think you've got to look at also the candidates, and I guess I'm going to throw out, I'm very proud. And I will compliment Joanne in a second, but we were 31-4 this year, guys. We had 31 victories in 2020. You can't do any better than that. But I want to compliment Joanne and her team, though. And not seriously, they did a great job on the vote by mail. And I want to say also, I saw on early voting and election day, probably the strongest presence by the Democratic Party that I've seen. I couldn't tell you the last election cycle in the last 10, 15 years. So I want to give them credit for, they were out there doing their job for their candidates, but we just had a lot better of a, you can't even call it an election day anymore, an election month.
Yeah, right. Election season.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Jackie, you're going where I wanted to go anyway, so I'll let you keep talking. So these local races, particularly the one you mentioned with Margaret Good and Vern Buchanan. And by the way, if Sydney or Joe are listening, I'm just busting your chops. We all love Joe Gruters. He's wonderful. So what was it? I mean, Margaret raised mountains of cash, not like a little bit. I mean, she was a fundraising machine. How did that not translate? How did that not get over? Usually you look at who's got the war chest and that plays out. What happened in that race from your point of view? And then Joanne, I'll go to you and then I'll let the reporters weigh in.
Well, in that race, I think, Vern had a very solid message of experience. I know his advertising started out on a positive note, talking the facts. Margaret started an attack ad. So then everybody responds. And then next, all our ads are all attack ads and negative. I just really think that, Vern has done a great job for this district, over the last number of years. He's gotten things done. The great thing is he, being on Ways and Means, gives him great opportunity to help us in Florida. And, he's also the co-chair of the Florida delegation with Alice, I can't think, is it Demings? Who's the Democrat?
Elsie Hastings.
Elsie Hastings. I apologize. No offense to the lady.
You just called him Alice, but that's okay.
I know. So I apologize for that. So, so he really, reaches across the aisle, and, you look at all the things that are positive on that. And I say the same thing about Greg. Greg's got a tough district with about, 8 counties, I think it is. And so, you look at these type of margins, and there are significant wins. And
I'm going to interrupt you a little bit, Jack, because specifically though, you're an old hand at this game, and having a lot of money is an advantage. Was it not used correctly? Was it the ground game hampering that we've been talking about, or what was it that? She didn't even win Sarasota County, as best I can remember. So what? I mean, we all know Manatee County's tough, right? It's a tough road to hoe in Manatee, but you would have thought that at Sarasota, what, from your point of view, what went wrong there?
I think, the messaging, I think the lack of experience, the lack of accomplishments up in Tallahassee, because obviously I firsthand know a lot and hear a lot what's going on. And, Margaret did her own thing up there. She was not bipartisan in any manner at all. I mean, very nice lady, sharp attorney, but, she chose her path when she went to Tallahassee, and, it came back to not really being a great record to show the accomplishments, where you have obviously Vern, who's got a ton of accomplishments and you got to remember, the great thing is Vern's interest, his interests are our interests. It's not like he's up there for an agenda for himself.
Joanne?
So it's really, really difficult to beat an incumbent in the best of times. Vern's been in office since 2006, great name recognition. But the bottom line, that district had a 50 or 60,000 gap. So more registered Republicans than Democrats. That's a really difficult hole for a Democratic candidate to get themselves out of. I think Margaret did an amazing job. She did raise the money. She got a lot of support from women. It was just a difficult time, and COVID obviously did not help. There was a little bit of a red wave because of the Trump support, and it just wasn't her time this time. And just let me throw in District 72, since we're talking about local races. Again, for Drake, COVID, our candidates stayed in, and they were not out there knocking on the doors. So yeah, it's disappointing, but we know when we do, if we can get knock doors and the issues, that we can get Democrats elected, even if there are more Republicans in a district. So hopefully,
and to the point of,
hang on, Jack. Go ahead, Jim.
Interrupt you. No, and when you get to 72, Fiona, obviously went through a very tough primary with Donna. They were both excellent candidates. That was a very close primary.
We're going to get there. Don't worry. Hang on. We're going to get there. Joanne, finish your thought, and then we'll come back. I got to give Zach and Jacob a chance.
Okay.
It's all right. Do you have more to say, Joanne?
Well, just that it's extremely difficult for new candidates to raise money when they're doing it by mail, by Zoom. It's not like you're out on, meeting new people. So that was difficult. We just, in District 72, we just couldn't get that momentum up. And, Drake just didn't have the name recognition.
Okay, well, I'm going to come back to you on that because I got more to quibble about that race. But Zach, what do you think about the Margaret Good race with Vern? What looked good on paper, but that's why we play the game.
I mean, it's not surprising that she lost. This was always an uphill climb for a Democrat. It is a district that has significantly more Republicans than Democrats. It's a district that has an incumbent who's been in office for 14 years, who's one of the wealthiest members of Congress, who is trying to work to do some things to try and appeal across the aisle. He's taken some positions that might be attractive to some Democrats. He was against pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. He's against offshore drilling. He's done some things. He's supported increasing background checks on gun purchases. So he's done some things to sort of neutralize the opposition a little bit. And so he's made himself a very tough candidate. And what is a little surprising is how badly Margaret Good lost. I mean, she lost badly. She lost by double digits. It was a big blowout, 11 percentage points. She lost worse. It was the biggest margin of victory for Vern of any of his races. He keeps building on his margins of victory. The Democrats came closest with Christine Jennings in 2006, where, she only lost by a couple hundred votes and they had a recount. And, it looked like that seat was winnable for Democrats. And I think ever since then, they've been pining for that and salivating over it and thinking that this is within our reach, and Vern keeps pulling the rug out from underneath them. And it's pretty interesting that Margaret Good was able to win, or I'm sorry, not to win, but to raise more money, more than $3 million, and it'll be more than that once we see the final reports. The most of any candidate since Christine Jennings, and lose by the most. So I think that, you can look at it a few different ways. Trump obviously had some big coattails in that district. When Trump wins Manatee County by 16 percentage points and Sarasota County by 10 percentage points, it's, darn near impossible for a Democrat to overcome those type of margins at the top of the ticket. But it potentially could be done in a different political environment. But I think we're seeing less ticket splitting now, more straight party voting, less of a willingness to kind of to go in between the parties, and people are much more polarized now. I'm not sure about how effective her message was. She really tried to hammer Vern for getting this paycheck protection loan that her own law firm got. He was able to kind of throw that back in her face and say, you're being hypocritical. So I don't know. I mean, it seems like Democrats keep trying to paint him as self-serving, when I'm not sure that, a message more along the lines of, healthcare or something along that would have been more effective. But obviously, they went after him on what they thought was effective, and it didn't work.
Since we're talking about, or Joanne brought up the Drake and Fiona race, that one was so especially after the primary, I was wondering if Drake might have a shot at pulling a Margaret Good in that race. What were your thoughts on why that one didn't work out for Drake and didn't work out for Fiona?
Who are you asking?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, and that was probably, the most surprising outcome out of any in the whole region, just because that was a district that Democrats proved, Margaret Good proved that you could win that district and win it despite Trump carrying it. And so, I think that, again, though, it wasn't surprising that the Republican won. It was surprising by how much Fiona won, because, to win that district by almost 10 points after Margaret Good won it by 7 points, that's a 17-point swing within 2 years. And so I think in that case, though, Buckman did not raise nearly as much money as Margaret Good. He did not run as strong of a campaign as she did. Part of it was because she was the only race on the ballot in 2018. It was a special election. There was a lot of energy and enthusiasm that came to her. So part of it is not necessarily all his fault. I think that she had some special advantages in that race, but it is, and he did raise $200,000, which is not bad for a Democrat for a state house seat in this area. I mean, it was a significant amount of money, but McFarland, she was out there working hard. She was knocking on doors. This is another issue where, the ground game probably helped Republicans. She put out on Twitter that she knocked on 25,000 doors during the general election. She was very aggressive. She kind of ran a campaign like Margaret Good did. I mean, she was, the Republican Margaret Good. She was aggressive on the ground. She had a strong team. She raised a lot of money. She had a strong resume as a Navy veteran. So not surprising that she could pull it out. It is a swing seat, obviously, but to win it by 10 points is pretty impressive for her.
I love that the reporters have now coined two phrases. We have the scolds and we have the Republican Margaret Good. So that we'll take away from this that we have new phrases. Jacob, in the time we have left, talk about both races. You have the floor on both Good and Fiona.
Well, I'll go ahead and start with the Fiona Drake race. I do think that ultimately came down to political climate, and Tuesday was a good political climate for Republicans statewide. So people know there were no Republican House members that lost re-election in the House this year. Republicans picked up 5 seats, including unseating 3 Democratic incumbents. And one of those 5 was the Fiona seat. I think that's a huge part of it there. she had probably had a better ground game than Drake, who really wasn't out knocking on doors the same way. That's part of it. Still, we expected it to be a lot closer race going into election night. We thought the atmosphere was really bad for Republicans. It was not. It was quite good in the state of Florida for Republicans. As for the congressional race, first of all, the DCCC has had something in it for Vern Buchanan since 2006, when he won this race by 369 votes. That was a nationally watched race. People felt bitter. They thought it was stolen. There were a lot of questions about the electronic voting at the time. It pretty much ruined electronic voting in America, that one race. So Democrats nationally have been focused on Vern Buchanan for a long time. I don't think that they should be. This should be the lesson. Margaret Good came in as probably the best recruit that they probably had for the race. She did not run a good campaign. She raised a lot of money. She didn't run a very good campaign. And I think that you don't have enough time for me to tell everything there, and it wouldn't serve me well anyway to describe it all. But
it'll be an article someday.
Yeah, but I think that ultimately this is just a race that is the district's too Republican for Democrats to think they can just come in and expect a huge blue tidal wave to carry them, especially after the blue wave of 2018 didn't help. This year, with Trump losing nationally, it didn't help Democrats to close the gap here. The gap got wider. The seat's trending red right now, not trending blue. So it's not a swing district. 72 is a swing district. That could swing back and forth. No one's held that seat for 8 years in the last few decades. So watch, that'll swing back and forth. But I think that you just got to admit that the 16th congressional district, as it's drawn right now, and this is the last election it'll be drawn that way, so who knows in the future. But that's just it. It's
a good point.
Not a winnable race.
That's a really good point. So look, we're a little bit over time, but I did want to make a comment. I've gotten a couple of emails about this, and so I'll just share it because they're all saying the same thing. Is first of all, we are really lucky to have guys like Zach and Jacob. I mean, most areas don't even have political reporters. I mean, they just get whatever they get off the internet, basically, and that's it. And we've got a couple of them that take interest in local issues. You know, I know you guys you're Tiger Bay regulars, you pay attention to what's going on. And I just think we're really lucky to have that. And I hope it stays that way. The other message that I return, you're welcome. You've earned it. The other recurring message I've gotten in this is a compliment to both Joanne and Jack. And it's a two-edged compliment. Meaning not a double-edged. I don't mean it's kind of a backhanded compliment. There's actually two compliments in one, is what I meant. Is first of all, kudos to everybody for the turnout. I mean, at one point it was looking like during the mail-in ballot stuff that the Democrats were approaching like 65% or something had already voted by mail. I mean, that's not the right number, but it was remarkable how many people you had gotten to the polls prior to Election Day. And you just ran out of voters, basically, I think is what my outsider view is. You got as many as you could, but it's like my son's football team. There's more of the other side usually in the games than on our side, and we lose badly. But that was great. And Jack, the flip side of that is in an era when people thought that there was going to be a blue wave. Not only was there not a blue wave, it was quite the opposite. And the fact that you were able to do that in a pandemic is just mind-boggling, frankly. I mean, kudos to you. The numbers you ran off, 11%, 10% on the Fiona race, 11% for Buchanan. Those are astonishing numbers. But the other recurring theme for you two, so you get two compliments to one, is you've managed to fight each other tooth and nail without being complete jerks about it. You guys are dogmatic in the sense that you believe in your ideologies. I think both of you are, but you're not shrill. You're not abusive. You're patient with the way you do things. And I just, take my hat off to you. The rest of the country can do what they do, but here in Sarasota, we do it the right way. So with all of that, unless you guys have something to add, we are over time. Happy 2020, everybody. We'll see you next year, I guess. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you.
See you. Thank you.